There was bad news this week in the Court of Appeal for Conor McGregor, but I think there was actually bad news for Nikita Hand as well. Let me explain. Firstly, the bad news for Conor McGregor. The Court of Appeal is now asking the DPP to consider possible perjury concerning the fresh evidence. So McGregor was to introduce new fresh evidence at the Court of Appeal, in which neighbours of Nikita Hand were going to testify or give evidence that they had seen a row between Nikita Hand and her then partner and physical altercation, as it were, and that might explain the bruising. However, that was withdrawn. The application to introduce that evidence was withdrawn the morning of the hearing, and so that has given rise to all sorts of rumour and speculation as to how or why that would happen. These people, the neighbours, had already sworn affidavits some time ago, and obviously they were going to be open then to give evidence in the trial or in the hearing. But that application, as I say, to introduce that fresh evidence was withdrawn by McGregor's side on the morning of the hearing. And that has given rise to the Court of Appeal concerning or considering asking the DPP to consider whether perjury arising from this fresh evidence. So the Court of Appeal is referring to the DPP material concerning the fresh evidence filed on behalf of Conor McGregor for consideration of possible perjury. So that's the bad news for McGregor. There's bad news, however, I think, for Nikita Hand as well. A lot of people are overlooking the fact that McGregor's appeal against the finding in the High Court by the jury that he sexually assaulted and essentially raped Nikita Hand, his appeal against that went ahead even in the absence of the fresh evidence, and he had different grounds for doing that or bringing that appeal. But it's bad news for Nikita Hand, in my view, as well. Just before we get on to the bad news for Nikita Hand, and leaving aside the fresh evidence, what were the grounds of appeal for Mr. McGregor? So McGregor's appeal went ahead anyway with the Court of Appeal, and the grounds of his appeal were that the trial judge erred in directing that the High Court civil jury should be asked to decide whether Mr. McGregor assaulted rather than sexually assaulted Nikita Hand. That's one of the grounds of appeal. Another ground included that the trial judge, Mr. Justice Alexander Owens, erred in permitting a line of questioning concerning Mr. McGregor's no-comment responses to investigating Gardaí after providing them with a pre-prepared statement in response to Miss Hand's rape claims. So they are the grounds of McGregor's appeal to the Court of Appeal. He hasn't gone with the fresh evidence from the neighbours claiming that Nikita Hand was beaten up by her boyfriend, etc. That's gone by the wayside. He still has these other two grounds of appeal. However, I think there's bad news for Nikita Hand here, because in addition to McGregor's appeal, McGregor's mate James Lawrence was appealing the award of costs, or the failure rather, by Mr. Justice Alexander Owens to award him his costs. The usual situation in litigation is that the loser pays the costs of the winner. And in this case, remember, Nikita Hand won against Conor McGregor in relation to her claim. However, she also accused James Lawrence of rape or sexually assaulting her, etc., etc., and that was not found to be the case by the jury. Nevertheless, the judge, because he took the view, Mr. Justice Alexander Owens took the view that Conor McGregor and James Lawrence were acting in lockstep, and Mr. McGregor paid Mr. Lawrence's legal costs. The judge didn't award Mr. Lawrence his legal costs. However, that flies in the face of the usual rule, where, as I say, the usual rule is that the loser pays. And in this case, in relation to Nikita Hand versus Lawrence, she was the loser. Lawrence has appealed that, and that appeal was going on in the Court of Appeal as well, and the Court of Appeal have given some indication, and this is where I think the bad news comes for Nikita Hand, because Senior Counsel John Fitzgerald for Mr. Lawrence, he argued on Wednesday that his client was entitled to his costs against Miss Hand on grounds including the normal cost rule that they go to the winning party. So that's the normal rule, and Mr. Lawrence's senior counsel is absolutely correct in that. and Ray Boland, however, senior counsel for Miss Hand, submitted that the trial judge had discretion to make the order he had. When counsel said an order for costs against Miss Hand would wipe out her damages award, Miss Justice Kennedy in the Court of Appeal said wanting the court to take cognizance of possible consequences of its orders was, quote, a difficult argument to make. So the Court of Appeal, Miss Justice Kennedy, is indicating that the argument being made on behalf of Nikita Hand, that if Lawrence was to get his costs awarded, it would wipe out her damages award. Miss Justice Kennedy has said that that was, quote, a difficult argument to make. You can read what you like into that, but obviously that particular judge, and there's 3 judges in the Court of Appeal, but that particular judge has given a sort of an indication that the argument that any costs awarded against Miss Hand would wipe out her damages award, that's not an argument that's going to win the day, quite frankly. That's what she seems to be indicating. That's what I'm reading into it anyway. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but she's not using the word difficult in relation to that argument for nothing. In other words, she's accepting the argument, but she says it's a difficult argument to make. And therefore, I think the bad news for Nikita Hand is that it's quite likely, well, it's possible, in my view, it's likely that the Court of Appeal will actually award costs to Mr. Lawrence against Nikita Hand. And if that's the case, according to Nikita Hand's own senior counsel, it would wipe out her damages award. I'm speculating, I'm guessing, but I'm taking, it's not just a wild guess, it's not just sort of put my hand up into the air and, you know, wave it around or see what way the wind is blowing sort of a guess. It's a guess based on the comment by Miss Justice Kennedy in the Court of Appeal, that she said that the argument that was being made by Miss Hand's senior counsel was a difficult argument to make. You can judge for yourself. Let's see what happens. The Court of Appeal have reserved judgment in this. And remember, there's 2 aspects to the appeal. One is Conor McGregor appealing against the finding by the High Court civil jury that he had raped Nikita Hand. And the other appeal, though, is James Lawrence's appeal against the order for costs not being granted to him. In other words, no order or his costs were not awarded to him, and as I say, Mr. Justice Alexander Owens, who had discretion, absolutely took the view that because McGregor and Lawrence were actually acting in what he described as lockstep, he didn't award Lawrence his costs, even though, strictly speaking, Lawrence won vis-a-vis Miss Hand. Hope you find the video useful. Hit the thumbs up button down below if you do. Thank you very much.